happened, really, really well in this book. So today I'm going to give a little background on the book, go through the storyline, hit a couple key themes, namely pride, kingdom, and of course Aslan, and end with that wonderful scene between Aslan and Shasta. So in terms of background of the book, this came out, we're doing it in order, so third to the last, although chronologically it's like the second or third book. It is dedicated, interestingly enough, to Douglas and David Grisham. Now, those are the kids that were Joy Gresham's sons, and they had come to visit C.S. Lewis in 1953, and this dedication occurred in 1954. So this is before Lewis had any relationship other than a correspondence with Joy, and he had met the kids, and they were 8 and 9 at the time and quite a handful. So he dedicated this prior to them, of course, becoming his stepsons. And a brief aside on that, Douglas Gresham ended up actually becoming a minister, and I think had kind of a difficult life and found his way back. David Gresham, Joy was Jewish, and David became an Orthodox Jew and moved to Israel. And so, and it's really hard. I've spent, not a huge amount of time, but like 15 minutes trying to Google and track the guy down, and I can't find him. So the gauntlet is tossed if you can find more about David Gresham than I've been able to. But he decided to become Jewish after Joy had died, and Lewis was raising the 2 boys who then were teens and quite a handful. And Lewis tried to keep a kosher household out of deference to David. So a brief aside. So this story is, it's wonderful. It's about a horse and his boy. So obviously the horse in this case is Bree, and the boy is Shasta. And it is a story of a boy that was raised by a fisherman on the shore in Kellerman, which is where the huge kingdom south of Narnia exists. And this is a large totalitarian kingdom, somewhat modeled after the Ottoman Empire. Tizrak, for instance, is a Turkish name for ruler. So there is a lot of, and they have curved swords and things like that. So there's a lot of sort of overtones of that empire. And it's a totalitarian state. It's ruled by the Tizrak, who is a key dominant leader, and everybody else has to, and he's semi-divine. So in that case, it's a little bit like ancient Egypt, and you might think of something similar to the Pharaoh. Whenever anybody says his name, the Tizrak, they always say, may he live forever. It's sort of, auto reflex. And so this is the kingdom that this boy is raised in. He doesn't know anything different. He calls this old fisherman father, but he's treated basically like a slave and does all the work, etc. One day, a great lord of the kingdom comes, a great warrior, and haggles to buy the boy from the fisherman. And the boy is just feeling like he's got the most awful life possible, that his father would sell him. But he's also kind of hopeful that he can leave this bad circumstance and thinks maybe his life could conceivably be better with this, warlord. And then the horse says, no, that's not the case. And so he's confronted with a speaking horse, and that throws him off. And of course, the horse is Bree. He's a Narnian horse, and that begins their great adventure where they flee the fisherman and the Tashcan, the Kellerman lord, and try to make their way to Narnia in the north. Along the way, they encounter another Narnian horse, Quinn, and Erebus, which is a princess who didn't want to be married off to an old senior Kellerman who was going to be a grand vizier, who was going to be second only to the Tizrak, the head of all of the kingdom. And so it's really an adventure story about these four characters. It's an adventure story of Bree and Shasta, his boy, Win, the solid horse, who's also a Narnian horse. Both the horses have been captured out of Narnia when they were foals, and Erebus. And it's about their adventure fleeing the southern kingdom. And they, find their way through the capital city. They have their own adventures getting out of the capital city. There's a little brief episode where they meet the Narnian kings and queens, and in this case, it's Susan and Edmund. Mr. Tumnus makes an appearance from Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the fawn who is holding the umbrella at the lamppost. And they, along the way, hear about a story that's going to where Rabadash, who was the prince of the kingdom, wanted to marry Susan. Susan realizes that Rabadash isn't a good guy once she's down into his kingdom. And so they hear the plot for him to try to capture her back and conquer Narnia, or conquer Archenland and then conquer Narnia. And so it is all a great story and a great escape. And Shasta ultimately saves the day and realizes that he is the lost twin of the Prince of Archenland. He's reconnected with his family and ultimately becomes King of Archenland. So that is a heck of a story in a very short book. So if you haven't read it, you should do so because it's a great read. Now on to a couple key themes. The first theme really done so well in this book is on pride. And you see that in Bree, who's a very prideful horse, a very great war horse. And he makes all kinds of bad decisions because he can't see past his pride and his vanity. You have Erebus, who is the girl who is fleeing this arranged marriage and, evil stepmother. And she's got a lot of pride. And that stops her from really able to see.
So is everybody able to hear Jonathan? If not, we'll probably have him back in just a few minutes.
The evil prince who wants to marry Susan, and he ultimately is caught up fully in his pride, and towards the end is turned into a donkey because he was disrespectful to the King of Archenland and to Aslan and to basically everybody else. And so that was his fate. So the main theme running through the book is the nature of pride. Another big theme, and Dwight talked about this in a sermon today, touched on kingdom, this notion of what was the kingdom of the Tizerac, and then contrasting that with the kingdom of Narnia. And it's very interesting how the kingdom of Tizerac was tightly controlled. Nobody had any rights. They say in the book, the only rule in Tashban, which is the capital of this kingdom of Calormen, was that people got out of the way of the powerful. So in that sense, it's a little bit like Rome. When Pilate says, what is truth? There was no truth in old Rome. There was only power, and the power was held by the lords and by the Tizerac. And the kingdom oriented itself around that power, and everything was about status and relationship to that status and to that power. There's glimpses of Narnia. Bree knows about Narnia as a sort of mythical place that he vaguely remembers as a foal, and for him, it represents freedom. The best image of it is when Shasta was in Tashban and he saw the Narnian kings and queens come up the street, and everybody was telling everybody to get out of the way. And he could just see how these people operated, how they were free, how they were talking, how they weren't shut away from the people. And then, of course, he realized the animals were also talking to them. And so the difference between the kingdom of the Tizerac And the kingdom that the Narnians operated in is contrasted so beautifully. And of course, what we find is that there is a king. There is a king in Tizerac, which is centered around power and is cruel to the point of wanting to sacrifice his own son, potentially, who was going to be his heir. But as he noted, 5 different Tizeracs leaders had been killed by their heirs. So the notion that he could get this hot-headed son off on a great adventure to try to recapture and frankly make into a slave his queen, Queen Susan, was just fine to him, because if he lived, he could expand his territory, and if he died, he would be free of a troublesome son who wanted to take him out. So, maybe echoes of Herod in terms of what that looked like in terms of their kingdom and their control. One other brief thought on kingdom, I think it's super interesting that this little free kingdom of Narnia, which is very small and relative to the vast expanse that the Tizerac controlled, really bothered the Tizerac. He goes, every morning I wake up, angry about the fact that this kingdom exists. And so I think it is true, actually, of Christianity that, in my study of history, it always surprises me how much Christians seem to bother people in power. And it's because they're operating outside of their power construct. You see that in China, the persecution of Christians in China. You saw it in Mussolini. I read a very interesting book called Mussolini and the Pope about how Mussolini subjugated and needed to control the Catholic Church. And frankly, not to the Pope's credit, how he, kind of did deals with Mussolini so he could push down the Protestants and reassert the Catholic Church. A very complicated relationship. But Mussolini really cared about exerting influence over the Catholic Church. And of course, Hitler, this story is best told through the Bonhoeffer book I referenced last week, but absolutely tried to control the Lutheran Church because they were the only base, however poorly, stood up against him and gave people a context beyond his absolute power. And so the Tizerac is very bothered by this kingdom of Narnia. And that leads me to my last point, which is, of course, Aslan. And the best parts of the book, and I'm not going to do this because there's so many little stickums I could read here about all the different places that Aslan appears. But we know that Aslan appears in pushing a boat of a small child to the shore when the caretaker of that child who had saved him from being attacked at sea dies. And that, of course, is Shasta. We know that there's a lion that roared, that brought 2 horses together, and that was Bree and Wind so that they could go on the adventure. We know that there's a lion that pushed the kids to run, where they were having to outrace Rabbitash as he was going to the kingdom of Archland, and that Erebus was scratched on her back, 10 strokes across her back. We know that that was a lion. And we know that there was a lion that came alongside Shasta when he was walking. So Shasta goes on this great adventure, finds King Archenland, tells him he's about to be raided, and then he's never really ridden a normal horse. He's only ridden a Narnian horse, so he doesn't actually know how to get a horse to go, and he gets lost, and he's distracted from there, and so, and then Bill's just coming in. Of course, there was a lion who scared away the hyenas at the tombs, and there was a cat that comforted Shasta. So there's just all these images of the lion in different forms. And so this brings me to my favorite vignette in the story. And so this is, and I'm going to try to cut this short because, frankly, you can just read these 3 pages and it is just fabulous, Lewis. So Shasta is alone, he's tired, he's separated from everybody, from the king, and he's wandering on this horse, and he says out loud, "I do think," said Shasta, "that I must be the most unfortunate boy that ever lived in the whole world. Everything goes right for everyone except me." And then he's walking along, and he hears someone breathing. Okay, his invisible companion seemed to breathe on a very large scale. So imagine this. He's in the dark, he can't see, and he hears somebody breathing at a very large scale. That is just classic Lewis. And then a few paragraphs later, Shasta says, "Who are you?" He said, scarcely above a whisper. "One who has waited long for you to speak," said the thing. Its voice was not loud, but very large and deep. "Are you a giant?" asked Shasta. "You might call me a giant," said the large voice, "but I am not like the creatures you call giants." "I can't see you at all," said Shasta. After staring very hard, for even a more terrible idea came into his head, he said, almost in a scream, "You're not something dead, are you? Oh, please do go away. What harm have I done you? Oh, I am the unluckiest person in the whole world." Once more, he felt the warm breath of the thing on his hand and face. "There," it said, "that is not the breath of a ghost. Tell me your sorrows." And so he talks about how he had lost his father, how he had been raised by this fisherman, how there had been lions that kept chasing him here and there, and a lion that had wounded Erebus. And then the large voice says, "I do not call you unfortunate," said the large voice. "Don't you think it was bad luck to meet so many lions?" said Shasta. "There was only one lion," said the voice. "What on earth do you mean? I've just told you there are at least two the first night, and there was only one. He was swift of foot." "How do you know?" "I was the lion." Isn't that just great? That those 3 pages are absolutely my favorite pages in the series. And so then it goes on. I won't read it all. Um, and Aslan, this is another key Lewis theme, and of course it's a key biblical theme. So Aslan's figuring out that this lion must have wounded Erebus. "Then it was you who wounded Erebus." "It was I." "But for what?" "Child," said the voice, "I am telling you your story, not hers. I tell no one any story but his own." "Who are you?" asked Shasta. "Myself," said the voice, very deep and low, so the earth shook again. "Myself," loud, clear, and gay, and then the third time, "Myself," whispered so softly you could hardly hear it. So, I mean, I think it'd be hard pressed to find more theology packed in fewer pages than what you've just seen there. You know, what is that to you, John? Um, the great Yahweh verses of the Old Testament, you know, "I am," you know, corresponding to myself. Just such good Aslan. And then, of course, Aslan connects with Bree and talks to him about his pride, connects with Erebus and helps her understand empathy. She was scratched in exactly the proportion that the girl that she had drugged so she could escape was scratched. And then Aslan was even merciful to Rapidash because he allowed him to live and gave him a chance to get around his fate of becoming a donkey. So this is just a fabulous book. So with that, I have gone on for 20 minutes, and which is surprising because that's almost exactly how long I intended to go on. I'm not going to read all these quotes in here, but boy, there is great stuff. And I'll open it up to dialogue if anybody has any questions, and if I can figure out how to do this screen. Oh gosh, I've become a tech leader on Zoom. So come off mute if you have any questions on or thoughts you want to share about really what is a fabulous book. Somebody's got to ask some questions. I would have gone on for
I had
25
my hand
minutes.
up. I guess I'll just talk. This is Karen.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought that the whole pride theme was just amazing, and that whole way that the fear of others' judgments and the fear of, you know, what people are going to think of me, and all those ways that went through it quite a bit more than I remembered in any of the other ones. More about, you know, this person's going to see me as this, or I don't know about that, or Or, and then the interesting one when Avarice runs into her old friend who starts talking and she has to hide, that part where they're still in the city. And she sees how, shallow she is. And it just really interesting about how other people see you and how you see other people.
Yeah, I second that. There is, that's why I mentioned the sort of kingdom theme, right? How you respond to the environment you're in, and how Erebus responds to being outside of that environment, going into the kingdom and feeling like she should be on a litter with people running ahead of her because she's the daughter of a great lord within that realm, but then seeing the shallowness of it. I mean, Lewis plays the notion of pride so beautifully. And I think he does another, Bree is I think unquestionably the best developed horse character in all of Narnia. Usually centaurs and horses are not that developed as characters. A little bit in the last battle actually, but Lewis has this great notion of the gradation, right? Evil and pride is on a gradation. And so when Bree was tired and just wanted to sleep just a little bit, that almost compromised the entire adventure. And that, leads me to the great Screwtape quote where Screwtape, the devil, says, why use murder when cards will do, right? Just that little bit of temptation, just that little bit of appeal to pride almost compromised their entire adventure. So Lewis does just a fabulous job working that with all these characters. Thank you for that comment. Other comments? I can't quite see hands, so just go off mute and if you've got a comment or question.
Jonathan, I hopefully you can hear. Do you know if Lewis himself ever made after the fact comments like, what do you hoped people would take away from a story or an episode or a character, or did he just let the book speak for itself?
No, I thank you for that question. Lewis said that he wrote the books to, quote, baptize the imagination, that he wanted to get across to kids this notion of good and evil, of a Christ-like figure, that this would be a template so that when they encountered these themes and this dynamic in their own world, our world, it would be familiar to them. So he did not write these books as explicit allegory. He wrote these books, and he says this quite clearly, as if a Christ figure appeared in a land like Narnia, what would that look like? And that, of course, is Aslan. So it's a very interesting twist on that. And he wrote in he found that the benefit of fiction and the benefit of essentially fantasy was that you get rid of your preconceptions. You can't pattern match against these creatures. So then you can look at the dynamic much more clearly. And so that's why I think it's fabulous that a key character in this story is Bree, and Bree's pride as a great war horse. We're able to look at the dynamics of pride and temptation and separation and alienation in kingdom precisely because this is fantasy literature, because we can't put it into our own context. So Lewis was he was trying to do all of these things, but to your first point, first and foremost, he was trying to tell a good story. So there's a great line that he told Tolkien, which is, Tolkien, there's not many books of the type that you and I like to read, so we must write them ourselves. And it's great that those two guys, particularly Tolkien, wrote the greatest fantasy literature of the 20th century. So they wanted to tell great stories, but they did it within a Christian framework.
I liked how many times
Other-
Aslan showed up too. He shows up more than some of the other books, and the different ways he shows up and the different, themes. Especially how he dealt with Rabadash at the end. That was really. I was like, how are they going to end this? You can't chop off his head. This wouldn't be Christian.
Yeah, I thought that it's great at the end that he showed mercy to Rabadash. Always showed mercy. This is not a vengeful lion, and
then-
so
The mercy ends up with a peaceful kingdom.
Yeah.
Rabadash is a peaceful ruler for his whole life.
yeah, exactly. Rabadash the ridiculous. So that's his fate, to be known by that for the rest of time in that kingdom.
A good faith.
Yeah, good fate for everybody around him, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Other comments or questions?
No, I'm sorry I got joined late, Jonathan. This is Sandra, but I had a little trouble getting onto Zoom as usual.
Well, welcome, Sandra. Well, then I'll jump to. I think the book ends, marvelously. So you have Erebus and Shasta. Shasta ends up. His real name is Kor, and he ends up becoming the king of Archland, which is this little kingdom south of Narnia, and this is Lewis's view of marriage in 1954. Erebus also had many quarrels, and I'm afraid even fights with Kor, who is Shasta. But they always made it up again, so that years later, when they were grown up, they were so used to quarreling and making up again, they got married, so as to go on doing it more conveniently. Isn't that fabulous? Lewis's view of marriage.
Yeah, this book and the last book, he's got these little really witty vignettes about contemporary life, bookend, at the beginning and the end of the book. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, he's definitely got a very dry wit,
Yeah.
and it comes across beautifully.
So my favorite is easily in but not easily out. So the lobster and the lobster pot.
Yeah, the other Gar like the easily in, easily out.
Yeah, said the lobster in the lobster pot.
Yeah, that's I think
Yeah,
that was
that
Mr.
was
Tumnus
good
or
one.
whatever. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? And then I'll preview the next two books, which are really, really interesting and actually complex books. So I will note that this book and the one before, the Caspian book and the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Lewis wrote relatively quickly, as in 3 to 4 months, he was able to write these books. They just kind of flowed from him very quickly. The last two books that he wrote in the series, curiously enough, chronologically are the first and the last book. The Magician's Nephew is the next one we'll cover, and that is the first book on chronologically. It's where we meet Professor Kirk, who of course is the professor that owns the great house that has a wardrobe that starts all of these adventures. This is him as a boy, and it's a story that has got just wonderful treatments, great Genesis themes. It's where we'll see the creation of Narnia, and this notion of many worlds. And so it is, it deals with themes that I find very complex in the Bible and this wonderful fantasy world that Lewis creates. And so that's the one we'll cover. Not next week. I figured 4th of July weekend will be busy enough that it's going to be hard to zero in with folks. So we'll pick that up the weekend after the July 4th weekend. And then the last book is The Last Battle. And this is a very complex book because it deals with the end of Narnia and signs. You know, it sort of deals with a lot of treatment from the book of Revelations, which is complicated. And it deals with, you know, who gets into heaven and who doesn't get into heaven, why. And so there is, these two books have a lot of complicated theology in them. And so, you know, you'll definitely want to take your time and read them because they are more sophisticated stories, more complicated stories than what we've read. And in large part, that's because Lewis had in his mind Lucy, who is the goddaughter of Owen Barfield. And of course, Lucy is a character. Lucy was who The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was dedicated to. And so he wrote basically these books, one book a year was published. And so in his mind's eye, he was writing to Lucy, and Lucy was getting older. So he was writing to an increasingly more sophisticated reader. And so these last books are, you know, if the first books say written to a 12-year-old level, the last books are written to a 15 or 16-year-old level. So it's much more sophisticated writing and much more complicated themes, which leads me to the last observation, which is Owen Barfield, who was Lewis's, you know, great friend and the father of Lucy, you know, said that the great thing about Lewis is that he never overcomplicated things and he never oversimplified things. He hit just the right balance to communicate his point clearly. So he's dealing with these very complicated topics and hitting it just right. Not simplifying it to the point that you lose the meaning, but not making it complicated to show how erudite he is or how well read. He doesn't need to prove anything. He's just trying to tell a story that relays some key thoughts. So that's what we have on deck. And if anybody, I'll take any other questions or comments anybody might have on this book or Lewis in general.
Yeah, this is Eric again. Now, you've probably talked about this, but it wouldn't hurt probably to repeat it. So the whole thing about, I am telling you your story, not hers. No one is told any story but their own. Could you explain that?
Well, that's biblical,
Okay.
right? I mean, that is, you know, who is going to sit on which side of Christ in the kingdom? And, you know, you do not know what you ask, right? Or, you know, what's going to happen to people. And, you know, Christ doesn't tell anybody somebody else's story. He just communicates and relates to the individual and not to the broader context. And so there's a deep theme that we all have our own story. And so Lewis says that in a number of the books where he does not share, Aslan does not share why he's doing something to somebody else. You saw that in the last book with Lucy when she had looked at the mirror, remember, and she saw the girls gossiping about her, and she was very angry when she was looking in the magician's book. And she asked Aslan, what happens to that girl that was gossiping about her? And Aslan says, child, I tell no one's story but their own, you know. So this is a big theme that Lewis picks up many, many times, that we each have our own story. There's also this great, you know, another great theme that I didn't touch on, but you've got me thinking about biblical themes. You know, the famous Pauline theme from Corinthians, you know, run the race as if to win it, you know, and this notion that Shasta has to, you know, every good deed is rewarded with more hard work to do, further to go, further to fly, you know. So Lewis, you know, you'll notice in all these books, people are always having to keep moving. they always have new challenges. And so that's just another great Pauline theme that's picked up throughout these books.
It shows him a tiny bit of mercy when at the very last he runs into the hunting party. Shasta doesn't have to run all the way to the town. And then he gets on the slow horse, but yeah.
Yeah, but then isn't that so fabulous, right? You would think that everything was going wrong at that point, and then of course that ends up being the seminal encounter with Aslan, and then getting into Narnia and calling the Narnian army down. I mean, you know, the one quote I didn't catch on, and this is so as was noted, right? Aslan's appearing. There's all this stuff happening, and all these strange circumstances, and then the character at the well where the kids end up, the hermit, and then the hermit has this great quotation that he has never heard of such a thing as luck. That if that's not a statement about the kingdom, then I don't know what is. You know, the hermit saying there's no such thing as luck. Aslan or Shasta saying that he had all this bad luck or the good luck to find people, and the hermit saying, I don't understand it, but I don't think there's any such thing as luck. That is operating within the kingdom of Narnia, that they open themselves up. Oh, here it goes right here. I say, said Erebus, I have had luck. Daughter, said the hermit, I have now lived 109 winters in this world and have never yet met any such thing as luck. There is something about all this I do not understand, but if ever we need to know it, you may be sure that we shall. That's a lot of theology packed right in there too. So, lots of Aslan, lots of chance, but no luck. Yes.
Jonathan, I have a quick question. It's sort of related to the previous two books, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader and the Silver Chair. Now, at the end of the Dawn Treader, Cassian comes back and marries the daughter of the retiring star, right? And then in the Silver Chair, the son is captured and the serpent killed the mother. Was that the same person?
Yeah, the serpent killed the daughter of the fallen star. Yes.
Right. That's what I was trying to figure that. Hey, thank you.
Yep. Yep. And that starts that whole adventure.
Going back a bit, it sounds as though we learn the lessons we need to learn individually. And it takes us deeper and deeper into the self.
Yeah, I think that's a good insight. And it's a function of freeing yourself of pride. It's a function of freeing yourself of things that are keeping you attached to this world.
Yeah.
And that's a theme that Lewis does such a wonderful job with in The Great Divorce. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
getting free of the things of this kingdom that keep you out of that kingdom. And he plays that so beautifully in this book.
Yeah. And clearly it's individual.
Yep. And every individual, you know, keen on aspects of Deut's sermon today. You know, Aslan cared about the servant girl who was injured because of Erebus's escape. You know, he's concerned about Rabadash. You know, he is his concern, and he has mercy for everyone, right? So it is a distinctly different kingdom when contrasted to the power-based kingdom of the Tizrak.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Fabulous. This is, it's been fun spending time with you all, and it's been fun kind of flipping through my phone. Sorry that all my iPads and Surfaces and everything else busted on me. but we're able to get this to work. And so, you know, thank you all for spending time, and I hope you enjoyed your little journey into Narnia. And we'll see you in 2 weeks when we go to The Magician's Nephew.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Take care.
Thanks very much. I'm enjoying this adventure.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I'm
Jonathan.
glad.
It's a nice adventure to go during